And you felt in yourself when you were doing the TM, you felt calmer and more happy and
Very
more
much
balanced.
so, yeah.
So within the confines of a me and a personality, you got benefits from that.
Oh, many, many benefits, And enjoyed teaching and working with meditators very much.
Did you have contact with the Maharishi at all?
A little bit, not a great deal, a little bit, yeah.
But was it this time when they were doing the sort of flying?
Well, that came later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did that. Yeah.
So you were actually...
Well,
they used to call it, it was kind of...
Hopping
it was hopping, wasn't it? But it looked quite impressive. I saw a TV programme about it once, and people could stay up in the air for several seconds without...
maybe not several seconds, but it was... Although it wasn't necessarily so impressive to look at, the experience of that particular technique was wondrously blissful. It was marvellous. Yeah. So, delightful technique. Yeah. But that was, you know, the basic meditation I'd been doing for several years before we learned that.
Because to do Zen meditation as a starting point before TM, it's quite... Because Zen's quite a stark meditation, isn't it? TM is much more gentle introduction.
Although I enjoyed the experience of the Zen meditation, it was quite hard work. And TM was effortless, easy, and immediately felt much more natural. And the benefits came straight away.
Yeah. And then you mentioned you met this teacher called Jean Klein? Yeah,
that was quite a few years later. That was in the early 90s. And I picked up one of his books by chance in a bookshop and found it fascinating, particularly because I read a passage that seemed to speak to something that was unresolved in myself and that was misunderstood or was confusing, and mentioned it to a friend who said, "Oh, I think he's coming to the UK in a few days' time." He lived in France.
Yes.
And the following week I spent a week with him on a residential course.
Right, yeah.
And that really, I mean, that was the first time that I had what you could call an awakening experience, and lasted for a couple of days of everything, as I mentioned before, looking very different, radically different, glowing and great sense of peace and joy. But after a couple of days it faded, unfortunately.
So there's this, I guess, this disappointment there because you're still kind of a me and the me's disappointed.
A little. In a sense, it wasn't too disappointing. It was more like, you know, something good happened. It lasted 2 days, you know, over time maybe it'll last longer.
Yeah.
And gradually, over the few years that remained of his life, whenever he came to the UK, I'd spend time with him. He was an elderly man when I first met him. Certain aspects of the contraction around the sense of duality and certain things started to fall away. So there was a sense, a belief that things were progressing. And so that was encouraging.
But on the other hand, you said earlier that when I asked you about had what you'd done for the 40 years contributed to, let's say, the breakthrough, whatever we call it, you said no. But so the progression was again into...
It seemed to be making a difference. And then a few years later, when I attended meetings held by Tony Parsons, who speaks about non-duality, that was a great relief, because Jean Klein, although he spoke about it in some ways very clearly, there was still something kind of mystical and a bit mysterious about what he was speaking about. And what Tony spoke about, although it was somehow unknowable in the ordinary sense, he seemed a more straightforward, ordinary person, and he didn't present it as something mystical or esoteric. And that really was a great relief. And so during the first, you know, I attended his meetings whenever I could for a year and a half, I think it was, something like that, maybe a bit longer, before this fell into place. Yeah, about a year and a half, I think.
And now do you still go and see someone like Tony Parsons?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. Not because something will change, but just to enjoy listening to how somebody else speaks about it and to see friends.
And do you feel, let's call it the state you're in, do you feel this movement, is there expansion?
To be precise, it's not so much a state, it's that there was previously a state of apparent separation.
Yes.
And that went.
Yes.
So what's realized is that in which states appear. So different states appear, but there's no longer any sense of a separate self. And within that, there has been a gradual, as I mentioned before, falling away of some of the strains and an increase in well-being.
But you see, I would, and I'm just trying to understand this as a layman, let's say, Roger. I would say that was probably to do with the personality, which you said was still running in its own way. And I wondered if there was something else going on in terms, I don't know what words to ask you to phrase the question, but when I say expansion, I don't mean necessarily a personality experience expansion. I mean something else that I can't quite phrase the question.
Not really, because that morning what was realized was the nature of life, the nature of being, which is timeless and absolute. So it's boundless. You could call it awakeness or presence. The word that's often used is being, or again, consciousness. And that doesn't ever change. So everything in the experience of life, or what was previously assumed to be my experience of life, that carries on, and there is a sense of expansion within that. But there's no expansion in that which is timeless. It doesn't, and funnily enough, it doesn't take up any space. It doesn't expand. The sense of expansion would appear in it.
Okay. And what's it like for members of your family who are very close to you on a day-to-day basis? Do they feel you different?
I don't know. People who knew me prior to it said there was some change. Things were a bit easier, a bit softer. I don't think members of my family noticed.
Really?
Yeah, but it was behaved in much the same way.
Yeah. It's interesting because you're really kind of, you feel with certain gurus, especially the more, the kind of traditional guru, they package something, and it's like as if you've taken away all the wrapping, and whatever there is there, and it's not, there's no spin behind it whatsoever.
Well, there was a belief in a lot of wrapping.
Yes.
And then it just goes.
Yeah.
And there's nothing special about liberation in terms of a so-called person. It doesn't happen to special people. It doesn't mean that there's something unique or pure or anything about, the apparent person. Quite the opposite. It's the realization there never was a separate someone to be special. So there was a great appeal of the wrapping. There was a desire for some of that. That was believed to be what was being looked for. But no, it's the ordinary is much more appealing, in fact. And it's not that teachings or practices, I think, are a waste of time. In how life is normally experienced, they can make a big difference. But that's within still the sense of duality. But there's no packaging, because there's nothing to package. It's simple and obvious, completely obvious. And it never changes, it's timeless. It's just that realization that everything that had been taken to be my experience of life, my experience of what was assumed to be me being conscious, me being aware, me who meditated and felt a sense of expansion, all of that was appearing in that which is timeless. and